So, what good is therapy to the people who need it? To the people who need it. That's the question I'm asking. I think a lot of people need to be confronted on their bullshit. I do. But I see the therapist as being quite hamstrung, quite disabled, quite unable to confront them on their bullshit that way, even compared to someone who's, say, a coworker, someone who's worked in the same office with you for years and knows you even on that shallow level. Like, look, I know the excuses you make. I know what's going on in your life. If what you need is to have someone who talks to you about your problems and confront you on your bullshit and give you a new perspective, I think the disadvantages of the therapist's position are much, much more important to appreciate than the advantages. Now, I think, just going to add this, I think it's really important to argue against your own position in these conversations, to point out the limits of your own position. So just say very briefly, I think there are some problems that are of such a technical nature that the sciences actually have given us some expertise that therapists have and that non-specialists don't have. I read a detailed account once of a guy who had become addicted to the feeling of sandpaper. And like in all of the United States, there are like 5 people who specialize in this. Sorry, that's a made up number, but there's an incredibly small number of people who have expertise in this type of tactile addiction. And he was taken through a series of steps of like training where he moved from sandpaper to finer grades of sandpaper to using some kind of rough cloth to using velvet, and they weaned him off his addiction to abrading his skin with sandpaper. And I've read a detailed account of a woman who was terrified of spiders, and she went to see a specialist in arachnophobia. And to give an example of what her terror used to entail, she would completely spray the interior of her car with insecticide every time before getting into it. There was no reason to think there was a spider inside, but just because the possibility of there being a spider inside her car was so terrifying, then she'd drive her car inhaling insecticide as she drove around. So this is really crazy. And, apparently there was some technical knowledge, and the guy took her through step by step and got her to the point where she could actually hold a spider in her hand and not freak out. So to argue against my own position, I think there probably are some areas where, and look, I'm being jejune here. I'm assuming those articles weren't lying. I haven't taken one moment to look at what percentage of people who get treatment for arachnophobia improve and what percent of people don't improve or get no significant benefit. That may... it may be, when you look into it, that actually treatment for arachnophobia and this type of tactile abrasion addiction, that actually the success rates are shockingly poor. It would not surprise me, given the research I've done on antidepressants and many other things. Maybe in reality, these are cherry-picked success stories from a field that is paralyzed by its inability to actually cure anything. Which seems to be the case with therapy, broadly speaking. However, I can imagine that your argument specifically, that you can't rely on your friends to address these things, that could be true of arachnophobia. Like your grandfather or your brother or your coworker, they just don't want to deal with the fact that you're terrified of spiders, and they don't, this is sort of technical enough, they don't want to deal with it, or they don't want to deal with the fact that you're addicted to rubbing yourself with sandpaper. Yes, so to argue against my position, I think my perspective has limits, and it's only valid within those limits. Unfortunately, that does not mean that treatment or therapy is successful outside of those limits. Henya Mania doesn't have rare problems. That's the name of her YouTube channel. First name Henya, last name Mania. Her problems are not rare. They're not extraordinary. And she now has decades of going in and asking for professional help, and nobody can help her. And sooner or later, they just admit that there's nothing they can do to help her with her psychological problems. I think that is a damning portrait of where this science and this province of the performing arts has progressed to in the year 2020.
It is technically considered. They might have underlying borderline personality disorder, and you can spend hours and hours trying to talk to them about it, but not really get anywhere, because what they actually need is genuine therapy. And so, I guess, and then another, people in the chat are making a couple points that I also think are valid, which is like a lot of the things people want to talk to a therapist about are very private. You don't want to reveal it to a friend. So in any event, it sounds like after talking to you, my perception of your stance, which was sort of just pure anti-therapy, maybe was a little hyperbolic. Maybe you do see some potential value, but it sounds like...
Oh, yeah. And my video that has in the title, get professional help. There is no professional help. It concludes by saying, go ahead and knock on every door. Go ahead, go to the psychiatric hospital, go to wherever it is you can get help. Go and ask for help. Find out what they can do for you. But sadly, be prepared for the possibility that there is no help. Because that's what happened to me. I knocked on every door here. This is Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. This is the capital city of this province, right? And there was no help for me under any heading, including employment help, including counseling for what my major should be at university. Like, some of my problems are very mainstream. It's like, oh, including the internship program. But yeah, including I went and knocked on the doors for therapy or whatever. And it's like, look, this is a really hard time in my life. Can anyone help me? And the answer is no. So this is another thing. I mean, I think your own position has a very clear limit in this, which is that, if you think there's help out there, sometimes you have to take no for an answer. Sometimes you will knock on that door and you will ask for help, and you're going to be disappointed when you're just told, no, you're on your own. There's absolutely nobody's going to help you. And here, in Vancouver or Victoria or Los Angeles, you may also be told, no, all we do is help drug addicts get on methadone, because that's what the entire service is devoted to. It's completely overrun with drug addicts, and that's the only form of social service. That can include everything from the unemployment services to the psychiatric services. That's all they're dealing with. So nobody's going to help you. I've knocked on the doors for legal aid. I just mentioned I have a divorce. I've tried to get legal assistance. I've tried to get every kind of help I can get. I live in the capital city of my province in a first world country, and my experience is there's nothing. Henya's experience is there's nothing. We matter. We're witnesses to this period of history. So for anyone who has a kind of just a best case scenario optimistic view of what these institutions are doing with their billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, I've got to tell you, my role is to be a canary in the coal mine and warn. If you go and ask for professional help, be prepared. Be prepared for that worst case scenario.
I have no pushback on that one.
But look, maybe you do know people whose lives have really improved because of therapy. I don't. If you do, that matters too.
Well, I do, but I also know people who have been completely abandoned by the system and betrayed by this. Tried every avenue and received no help. So I've kind of seen both sides of it. Money is clearly a factor. The people that have gotten help were not, destitute.
Yes, I knew a guy who was a millionaire, but he was just kind of creepy. His mannerisms, his face, like he wasn't somebody people want to talk to. Sorry, it is part of the story. But he had he didn't have $100 million, but he had a couple $1 million to his name. He was a multimillionaire, and he looked old. He looked like he was in his late 70s. I forget, maybe he was in his 60s. Just a creepy, disturbing guy to be around. Most people didn't want to talk to him. I'm a very self-confident person, but I can understand, like, if you talk to people about his problems. And I remember that guy, he went through the therapy Olympics, I remember that guy. And to me, it was like this great example of you're the most privileged person in the world. You're this multi-millionaire living in Toronto, Canada, he was. And, he needed a friend. He needed help. He was too old to have a grandfather, but he needed help. He needed love. He needed meaning and guidance. He needed a lot of things from people. He needed a lot of things he wasn't getting. And sadly, I don't think he got it out of the psychiatric establishment. But I have a human heart. I sympathize with all sides. Like, I sympathize with that dude taking his millions of dollars and trying to get help. And I sympathize with the therapist who's probably sitting there like, oh, Christ, I got to sit here and listen to this creepy old man talk about his creepy old man. And they probably just didn't sympathize. They just didn't care. Get out of here with your millions of dollars. They probably, I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we covered that topic. That was interesting.
Keeping it all the way real.